Welcome back to episode 4 of the School of Muscle. In this episode, I have a nice discussion with Pascal Flor. Pascal is a former competitive powerlifter, and now he is just head over heels into bodybuilding, and he's a coach over at Revive Stronger. He's worked with various physique athletes, strength athletes over the years, and has a lot of experience with these guys. And Pascal really knows his stuff. He stays up to date on the science. He's constantly educating himself, learning new things, and he really has some quality information to share with you guys today. Not only this, but fun fact about Pascal is he actually played in a band for 8 years. So that is pretty cool. And in this podcast, we discuss body fat settling point, how to kind of manage relationships, friendships, work, along with lifting and doing that sort of thing, how to eat on holiday or when you're going out with somebody, how to manage those things, and a lot of other interesting information. Well, at least it's interesting to me. So without further ado, here's episode 4 with Pascal Flor. And wow, how about that rhyme? Not even planned. Okay, enjoy the video. All right, Pascal. So the very first thing that I kind of want to touch on here is that, like, you have more of a history of being a little bit more overweight, probably classified as obese, like myself. We're kind of in that former fatty club, and I'm just really curious that if in your experience, have you been able to kind of ever lower kind of your body fat settling range, that range in which you feel good, perform well, build muscle and things like that? Because I think that, a lot of people, losing fat is kind of the easy part once you get the basics down. And the difficult thing is actually whether you can feel good, perform well, put on muscle at that reduced body fat level. So kind of what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so I have so many thoughts on that one. Simply because, first and foremost, I have to say that when I was really overweight, I was 14 years old. So it's a little bit longer ago. So half of my life has passed already. Yes, I'm that old. I'm 31
No.
now. So during that time, I think my body was still going through a lot of changes, puberty and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not entirely certain whether this had such an impact on my physiology that was still hanging around after my puberty, because you know it yourself. I mean, your body is changing drastically throughout puberty, and maybe when it comes to fat cell physiology, something is changing there as well when you're going through it. So I'm not entirely certain whether it is even possible to actually get rid of fat cells, because I once talked to Eric Hams about it, whether it is possible to actually reduce your fat cell amount in the body, and whether this is something that happens over decades, maybe. When you are on a lower body fat percentage, that the body simply gets used to it, and the fat cells that you've accumulated when you were obese, that they just die out because they aren't fueled or anything. And he had the theory that it could potentially be possible that the fat cell amount is getting reduced, but this is a matter of ages, really. Nothing that is happening over like a short time span. But this is only, of course, a theory, because trying to see that in patients, it's really hard, because I mean, you have to observe that. You have to find individuals who actually are able to keep the weight off, which we know is one of the hardest parts for people who lost some weight, to actually keep it down. And then you have to monitor them over years. And first and foremost, you have to find them when they were obese and when they are then losing the weight. So all these circumstances are really hard to find then participants who are in that position, who you can then monitor and watch and see whether fat cells actually disappear over time. But for me personally, so I was my heaviest when I was 14. So I was 90 kilograms on 160 centimeters. So what is it in pounds? It's above 200 pounds, I think,
Yeah,
at
that
the
sounds
age of
about right.
14. Yeah, and so I always had issues with myself when it comes to the mental aspect of it. So when I got into lifting, I always had that barrier in mind, the 90 kilogram mark, right? Where it was just like, I can't possibly go beyond that because then I'm categorically classified as fat. At
Right.
least I had the feeling of it, right? And this time around in that improvement season, I decided for myself to exceed that barrier just to break through it from a psychological perspective so that I realized that there's nothing wrong with going above it. I did that. I went all the way to 95 kilograms, was a little bit too chubby for my taste, but this is, of course, always subjective. When you've been obese, when you've been overweight, you always have a screwed perception of your body image. You always have the feeling that you're too fat, that no matter how lean you are, you always see the fat individual you have been, maybe, at least in your opinion. And in that case, 95 kilograms was the heaviest I've ever been. I was struggling mentally with that. However, I must say that probably my body felt really comfortable there. Um, it must be noted, though, that now I'm cutting again, just because I'm planning to do a contest prep next year, and I'm doing a diet before the diet, and the weight is just flying off. I don't have to do anything. I'm not struggling whatsoever. So I would assume just from these indicators that I was above my body fat settling point, that I was above the range where I feel comfortable. Even though I felt healthy, I didn't really feel comfortable in my skin anymore. This might be psychological, but it was summertime. I was sweating all the time. I was out of breath the entire time. Performance was okay-ish, but I would assume that I could easily replicate the performance with a lower body fat percentage as well. And just once again, the indicator in it for itself that the weight is just coming off so easily right now that I don't feel any kind of dieting symptoms just tells me that I was exceeding my body fat settling point. So can you change it? Just to answer your question, I think you can probably, but it takes a long time. And also just from experience, you have to find out whether you are in a specific range comfortable there or not. And I think that for some individuals, the range is a little bit wider, and for some, it's a little bit narrower.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that because, like, I know I very similar experience where when I was going through kind of my adolescent stages of puberty and stuff, I was probably around that, like, that 210, 220 mark. So which is probably right around 90 to 100 kgs. And
Yeah.
now, like, I'm I'm getting the highest I've gotten since then is like 180, 185, and like I'm definitely more lean than when I was at those higher body fat percentages, but I am starting to get kind of the symptoms of maybe even being over my body fat settling point a little bit, maybe feeling a little more lethargic at times and things like that. So, I think that the point that you brought up about how body fat just seems to be coming off of you really well now, I think that's a big, like, indicator that you might actually be above your settling point and that you might have actually lowered your settling point over time.
Yeah, totally. And one thing to add on this one is that I wasn't feeling hungry anymore. And that was kind of the first time in my life that I experienced that I didn't want to eat anymore, even though that I had palatable food in front of me. I was just like, nah, this isn't for me anymore. And it's so funny because when people brought that up, like Mike Israel, for example, he brought it up. Okay, you bulk to a certain point where you're just sick and tired of food. And I could never relate to that. I was always thinking, mate, I can always eat no matter what, right? And I came actually to that point where I was just like a little bit sick and tired of it. And I just wanted, I was craving to cut, which is absolutely weird. And this is something I've never experienced in my life before from a physiological perspective. I mean, psychological, it's a different beast, right? I mean, I think we live in a day and age where most of us have the tendency to always be on the leaner end, even though it might not be as productive for us. But yes, from a vain perspective, I was always craving to be leaner. But from a from a physiological perspective, it was the first time that I actually was a little bit sick and tired of food, and especially when it comes to palatable food, I wasn't even craving that anymore.
Yeah, I have the exact same experience where, I never could relate to not wanting to eat any more food. Like that just never made sense to me. But like now, after I've probably gone about, I don't know, 16 to 18 months without dieting, and it's like completely satiated. Like food is
Yeah.
just completely an afterthought, and it's a really good place to be in. And I think that's another really good indicator that you're probably at least within your settling range and you're not below it, and you're not running into some of those other negative diet adaptations that can happen if you're staying a bit too lean. But the next thing that I kind of want to ask you about is whether, you know, you mentioned earlier that it's not conclusive whether you can actually lose fat cells. So if someone has accumulated those fat cells like earlier on in life through adolescence or things like that, do you think that it has made you a little bit more susceptible to fat gain during like a bulking period? Or do you think that, you know, it would have been relatively the same without those fat cells? Or do you have experience with clients that come from overweight experiences and have a little bit more difficult time going through a gaining phase? What's kind of your experience with that one?
Hmm. I would assume that this is the case, but now when I really think about it, it might just be that I'm imagining it, if you know what I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
because I don't have any kind of comparison. I can't turn back time and put myself in a situation where I could go down a road where I'm not overweight as a chubby kid. I'm not accumulating as much or as many fat cells. And thus, I can't really compare it to another. And I don't think that there's any sense then in thinking about it. It's like the genetic aspect, right? What is my genetic ceiling? We never know. We won't ever know, right? That's why just do what you can to actually get there. However, when it comes then to clients, when they have been a little bit more overweight, yes, they are more susceptible to regain the weight and for weight gain especially. But I think that this might perhaps be more environmental, that their environment is dictating their behavior and that they are more susceptible to the environmental changes around them instead of their behaviors, that the behaviors they have ingrained over the time span of a cutting phase, that they stick around. So I see it more often that people fall back to old behaviors and to the quote unquote bad behaviors they have been doing for years on end, which got them to the place of being overweight, instead of sticking to the, I hate the term, but the better behaviors they ingrained over the time span. And maybe that was just the case for me, because when I was fat and I lost the weight, I lost 30 kilograms in one row because I was always active, but I was just eating shit when I was younger. And I kept the weight off, but simply because I never ever wanted to be fat again. I was kind of afraid of it, right? And that's why ever since I'm 14, I'm pretty conscious about my food decisions and what I'm eating. And I think that because of my behaviors and the things I've been doing constantly for now decades already, or not nearly 1 decade and 1.5 decades, right? That this is what actually dictates how or what I'm looking like, and not kind of the fat cells I may have accumulated. Because people, and I think that our society is more so driven by marketing and also the availability of palatable food around us, instead of our physiology that is driving us. Because I don't know many people who are truly intuitively eating anymore. And when they do, in our society, they are most of the time overweight, because there are food companies out there, chemists who are working on creating the most palatable food there is for you so that you are actually consuming that food and all the other foods as well along with it.
Yeah, I think something to kind of add to there is that you know a lot of people, at least in my experience, when I look at a lot of people that share their progress on Instagram and stuff like that, and that look good in the off season and are relatively lean, I feel like a lot of these people, when you look at their history, are people that have kind of always been pretty lean. And I think that if you don't have a history of being overweight and obese, I just think it's a lot easier to maintain a leaner physique going through like an off season or a massing phase, and that it's pretty rare to see someone that used to be overweight that they're sharing a ton of like progress photos during the off season. And that could just be that might not be necessarily true for everybody. I'm sure it's not, but I think that's just kind of a general observation that I've made across a lot of people.
Yeah, it's super interesting that you're bringing that one up, because then I always ask myself whether it is simply because of or from a vain perspective, that the people who have been overweight, that their perception of themselves, they are so screwed that they aren't simply sharing their progress, whereas they are actually looking the same way as people who have always been lean. Sure, there are certainly people who always look good, but it's probably more so genetic that the muscles are showing or are more so visible to the audience, especially someone who has a, let's say, more beneficial body fat distribution for something like social media, like always present abs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could be like pretty fat around the glutes or the legs, but no one really cares about that, right? And unfortunately for me, for example, I'm carrying most of my fat stores on my upper body, and especially around the midsection, like classical
Yep.
classical
Same here.
dad bod distribution, right? And yes, so maybe there is something to that, but I'm always a little bit skeptical about it, even though I'm not sharing my progress pictures myself as well. But this is more so a problem I'm dealing with myself, and this is just, yeah, from a vain perspective from my end.
Yeah, I think the whole psychology component to this is really big too, and something that I've kind of overlooked in the past is that maybe these people are just they've gotten lean and then they just never really feel lean again, and they're kind of worried about going back to that. They've kind of identified with their lean self, and anything other than being super lean, they're just not willing to kind of post. So I think that's a good
Well,
addition there. And you kind of brought up. Do you have something to add
I would
there?
like to, yeah, one thing though, and that is when you've been really overweight, I think everyone can relate to that, probably, that you have loose skin. And loose skin will screw with the perception as well. You might be as lean as individual A beside you, but because you have loose skin, it looks like you are carrying a little bit more of body fat, which is unfortunate. I mean, last year when I was doing my contest prep, I was 75 kilograms. I had already veins over my stomach, but it still looked a little bit loose, especially when I was sitting. And that moment, right, when you are sitting down, it was summertime, you are already quite lean, and then you're sitting down and everything is just hanging, and there's always a little bit of skin, uh, like a cupcake, right? You are a cupcake when you're
Yeah.
just wearing your pants and you're shirtless. There's always a little bit of skin wobbling over your pants, which really screws with your head. And maybe you are already quite lean, but just because of the loose skin and depending on how fat you've been in the past, this could actually have a dramatic impact on your overall perception of yourself.
Yeah, I think it can most definitely create a. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of bodybuilding is kind of a sport of like illusions and how you look, and I think that loose skin factor can easily make a very different illusion, because a lot of people will talk about how different they can look during peak week. Yeah, it's only the final 2 to 3% of your entire look, But if you really mess it up, you could probably create a little bit different of an illusion. And when you
Absolutely.
consider the loose skin factor and things like that, I think it can definitely play a role. And with your contest prep coming up here, do you think that it's going to be, a little bit more challenging for you to get to stage since you might have this background of being a little bit more overweight? And I know more challenging, that's a complete arbitrary term, but like relative to someone that's, might have a little bit lower of a settling point, do you think that you might have a
Mm.
little bit more difficult of a time? And how do you kind of plan to offset that a little bit and kind of strategize, okay, since I might have been a little bit more overweight, doing these things in my diet could potentially help me get to stage a little bit easier?
Sure. So, because I've never been that lean before, I can't really tell how I'm going to feel. That's why I'm already doing the preventive measures right now. That's why I'm doing the diet before the diet, to actually put myself in a better position, make it a little bit smoother and easier to get to stage, so that I have a break in between. I can just, I don't know, ride around there, um, get a little bit of a downtime, so to speak. And because of that, because I can't really tell how it's going to be. Unfortunately, I can't foresee the future. Would like to always say that to my clients as well, that I would like to, but I can't. Right? But because of that, all I can do though is to plan ahead, and that's what I'm doing right now. Um, that's why I did the diet before the diet. Then in December time, I have like 5 to 8 weeks of just cruising at maintenance, just to reset myself and also refocus, so that my body, so my physiology and my psychology is ready for the last push. So it could potentially be hard, but is it harder than other people perceive it? I think it always depends on how you're structuring the prep in it for itself. You always, I mean, I once had a client, his first show he ever did was a 7 week contest prep, and he had to lose, like, I think it was 13 kilograms. Yeah,
Is
you can imagine how low he had to go on his
yeah.
calories, and also how much cardio he needed to do. And when I heard that story, it was just like frightening. And I just thought, how the hell have you been able to push through it? That I have massive respect for him that he was able to push through it,
Right.
right? But I think it always also depends on the willpower, and your environment. I think that when you're not putting yourself in a good spot before the contest prep, that when there's a stressful time coming up, why then do a contest prep, right? Try to control everything you can control. And if then something comes up, you can better deal with that, instead of just, yeah, I want to do a contest prep because I want to do a contest prep, because that's what I did last year. Even if the odds were against me with my hip surgery back in December 2016, I was sleep deprived. I was still diet fatigue. I was doing evening school, still working office hours, working on my self-employment. All that kind of stuff was going on at the same time, which was simply too much. But I was too stubborn about it, and I just wanted to push through it. And of course, I pulled the plug, right? And I think that this happens more often than most of the people are aware of, because they never hear about the people who don't make it to stage. They only see the quote unquote winners. And it taught me so many lessons last year, and also along with clients that wanted to compete, weren't in the perfect spot to actually do that. All these kind of things actually help you realize that you can control what you can control, do that, plan ahead, and then if something comes up, you still can deal with that, right? But it's not that shit breaks loose then.
Right. And do you plan on using like specific dieting strategies throughout your contest prep, like things like multiple day refeeds, back to back refeeds? And then I'm guessing that depending on like what you have going on in your life, you're probably going to be planning like deloads and diet breaks kind of around that a little bit. Would you like to kind of speak to that a little bit, how you're kind of structuring, things like refeeds, diet breaks, and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to start the contest prep in January, but the way the cut goes right now, it could potentially be that. So I'm 5 weeks in now, and I already lost. What was it again? 7 kilograms, so 15 to 16 pounds already,
Yeah.
which is a lot of glycogen and water and
Right.
the food content not sitting in my digestive tract. But of course, I mean, when it goes that well, and I have planned to do the diet for 14 weeks, then I'm in a really good spot to actually then ride along with the maintenance phase and maybe then start the contest prep in January, even though that I wanted to first step and stage in September next year, because then I can just cruise along just really smoothly and implement lots of diet breaks, maybe even a longer period of maintenance just to make it really, really smoothly for myself. And it is then my first true season. And I want to make it to stage simply because I was so pissed off and frustrated about myself last year that I didn't make it. And that's why I'm trying to do it as smoothly as I can, and especially because I'm starting now my undergrad in on Monday. Yeah, on
Yeah.
Monday it is about to start, and with that, together with my family, so I have a girlfriend together with her son. Um, I mean, we are planning to have a child together, all that kind of stuff. That is about to happen in, I don't know, in the somewhere in the future, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it happens this year, maybe it happens next year or something. This is something I don't want to plan. If it happens, it happens. And if that happens when I'm contest prepping, then it happens when I'm contest prepping, right? But I want to be prepared for that. And I also want to still enjoy life, still give them the time they deserve, still have the capacity mentally and also physiologically to do my undergrad, still run the business, all these kind of things. I don't want to get too impacted by my decision to do a contest prep. And that's why I'm definitely going to implement diet breaks, maybe also play around with refeeds, but I'm not the biggest proponent of refeeds right now because I think that the scientific literature isn't really strong on that one. And I would like to actually see some more research on that before I'm really actually starting to implement that, even though that people like Jay say they have found that consecutive refeeds are actually helpful for their clients. It's not the personal anecdote I've seen. So yeah, I just want to wait before I'm actually implementing something like that. But when the time comes, when I'm getting closer to stage, of course, I would like to implement these. But the most optimal scenario would be that I'm ready early, and then I'll eat my way back into the show. Right, that is the perfect scenario for every competitor. But that's not what I'm hoping for. If it's once again, if it's happening, it's happening. But it's not something I would say beforehand that this is the ultimate goal I have.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned like refeeds and those things, and I actually recently talked to Eric Helms about refeeds
Mm.
and stuff. Go check it out, episode 1, School of Muscle, rydsalva.com. Shameless little plug there. But he discussed kind of a new study by Dr. Campbell's lab out of like University of South Florida, and I'm not sure if it's published yet or if it just got published or kind of what the status is on it there, but I know he mentioned that it compared two dieting groups, one group that had just straight calories through and one group that had, and the calorie deficit was equated between both groups. And then the other group that didn't have the straight calories straight through, they had like two kind of refeed days, and then the other days were like a lot lower to make up for the calorie difference there.
Mhm.
And the group that had the kind of the non-linear dieting actually saw some better gains, better body composition by the end of it. And that's one study, so like you can't take much from that, but I know some people talk about how consecutive day refeeds have really helped. So could be potentially beneficial there. But the,
Absolutely. And I mean, there are also other studies that are showing something similar, like just cyclical approaches to dieting, where participants, that one group, I think it was a longer study. From the top of my hand, I can't really recall the details of it, but I think that the one group was dieting like for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And the lost weight was similar between both groups, between the group who actually dieted through the 12 weeks and the group who, or 10 weeks or something like that, right? And the other group who actually had a cyclical approach to that. So it's really interesting, but yeah, once again, I would like to see more studies being conducted on that area before I actually play around with it a little bit more.
yeah, makes sense. And I think the study that you're kind of talking about there, I think that's was called like the Matador study or something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
And I think, yeah, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And yeah, so the you kind of discussed about how, you're Pascal family man now. So I would be
Yeah.
interested in how you're kind of trying to manage, your relationships and this whole bodybuilding thing and this fitness thing, because, it it can take up a lot of time, and it can take up a big portion of your life, and it can make it difficult to manage relationships and work and things like that. So I would be interested to hear if there's any like specific things that you try to do to try to kind of manage these things.
Yeah, so once again, I have so many thoughts on that one. So first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to Jacob Skappis from JPS Health and Fitness, my man, because we had him once on our podcast where he was talking about his recent contest prep, where he pulled the plug on as well. But big props to him because from the get-go, he has two daughters, he's running a successful business, has a wife, and he was saying from the get-go that when the contest prep is actually starting to negatively impact anything else in his life, so has an impact especially on his family, especially on his business, then he will pull the plug because it's simply not worth it. And I don't know, that stuck so much with me. And this is a philosophy and also mentality I applied for myself as well, because it is my decision. It's it's like you said, bodybuilding can take up so much of your life. And because it is kind of a 24-hour thing when you decide to do a contest prep, um, it can have an impact, a massive impact on your environment. And this is not something I would really like to happen to my environment, especially not to my girlfriend and to her son, simply because they can't do anything about it and they don't deserve it. Simply because of a decision I've been making for myself, basically. Because I mean, contest prep is a luxury. We are deciding to starve ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And because of that, because it is our decision to go through something like that, I don't think it is justified to let others get influenced by that. And because of that, I'm trying to really be conscious about that it's not going to impact them. And if so, I already sent my girlfriend the semi-starvation study so that she
Yeah.
actually has an idea of what is kind of going on with people who are strategically starving themselves and who are getting to really low body fat percentages, so that she has kind of an idea, right? Because she's not into bodybuilding. She has no idea truly what that means. And she never knew someone who got to that low of body fat percentage. So just to prepare her, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be like one of the guys from the semi-starvation study, but I just wanted to prepare her for things like mood swings, why I'm acting the way I will act. Hopefully, I won't be like that, but if it's going to happen, that she's kind of prepared as well, that she knows it is probably due to dieting and not because I don't love her anymore or I don't want to be around her anymore. And when I'm getting easily annoyed or stressed, it's because of the caloric deficit and because I'm getting lower and lower on body fat percentages. But still, I'm trying to make an effort to not let that impact them and also not the business, because once again, it is my decision, and no one deserves to be treated negatively only because I made that decision to starve myself and to step on stage with a tan on and some Speedos.
Right. And, I think having just that honest, open communication with them about, this is something that I'm choosing to do. It means a
Yeah.
lot to me. I'm going to do my absolute best to not let it affect you. But, here's this study. This is what can happen to some people through starvation, which is, basically kind of what you're doing here. And
Yeah.
I think that open communication, getting both of you on the same page makes a lot of sense and can really be beneficial for kind of keeping things together throughout your prep. Because, if I was just going to say, if you come out of prep
absolutely.
and you don't, and you have messed up relationships and things like that, then I really think you're going to sit on that other side and be like, man, what did I just do? Did I just, kind of waste this
Absolutely.
portion of my life to step on stage and lose relationships and things like that? And, it can really turn into kind of a negative experience.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think that being on stage is not worth sacrificing maybe important things for you for your life. I think that relationships are so much more important than walking a lonely path that is called bodybuilding. At least that's my opinion. And I'm not saying that or blaming someone who decides to do that, but it's not for me. I think that I want more in life than only stepping on stage, simply also because I'm not making a living stepping on stage. It's just an interest of mine. I do love that, but that doesn't mean that other people have to suffer because of my decisions and my passion. And sure, there will be people who won't understand. Especially, I know that the parents of my girlfriend have no idea about bodybuilding, right? And I know that there will be some events where I will probably say that I'm not participating. I always encourage people to participate at social events and not be that hermit and trying to avoid them, because it's so much easier to just be that hermit and just cancel yourself out from society. But it's a way tougher thing to do to still participate in others' lives and also at the events and stuff. So I always encourage people to still try to do that. But I also know that there will be events where I won't be participating because people won't understand. I will sit there, I will deny things they're offering me, drinks, foods, all that kind of stuff. And I also don't want to be Tupperware Tony bringing my stuff to a family event with my Tupperware, because some people simply don't understand. And I don't want to, in that situation, I don't want to bring up the willpower and also the mental power to explain it to them and stuff, right? Once again, I just want to highlight, though, that I'm always encouraging people to still try to make an effort to participate at these events, because they are precious. They are perhaps like the only time that you can do a certain thing. But it's during other events, and also you have to consider just whether it is worth it or not. And I'm just prepared for situations where I will probably avoid situations. And this is also something I already discussed with my girlfriend, that when the time comes, that it could potentially be that I'm just like saying no. And I will probably also tell the grandparents that the reason why, so that they don't think that it's because of them or something, but because I have a strict goal and it makes it harder to participate than actually staying at home. And I don't want to do them any kind of disrespect in being there, but not eating the foods. You know it. I mean, there are different cultures, and for different cultures, food is a more important aspect, which is luckily not really the case in Germany. It's more of a get together that counts. Um, but there are other cultures where it's really important. And I think that when you are denying to come to something, or you're denying actually eating some food. That could be really disrespectful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in my experience, like with my family, with the get-togethers, the very first thing that people's kind of head goes to is, what are we eating?
Yeah.
That's kind of the very first thing. And sometimes I really have to kind of check myself with, okay, I really don't have plans to compete. I don't know if I'll ever compete in the future. I'm mainly doing this for fun, for enjoyment. Do I really have to be this strict with myself, during, especially when I'm not dieting, during an off-season phase? Do I really have to, worry about, trying to hit my macros on holidays and events and things like that? And, I know that some people will go into like events and holidays, and they'll just kind of guesstimate and track, and if you can do that and still have a good time, great. But in my experience, it caused me to always be thinking about what macros are in my foods, and
Yeah.
it gave me something to think about rather than just being kind of present in the moment. So like with your clients or with yourself, for holidays and events, do you generally recommend them to kind of just guesstimate their stuff, or do you
Mhm.
kind of recommend, hey, it's just a single day, you would be fine if you just, kind of, you don't need to go crazy with it, but if you just have, a moderate meals and just kind of ate intuitively for the day, is that something that you would kind of recommend? Or just, I'm sure it's going to depend on the exact individual basis, but
Yeah.
what do you think there?
I mean, I mean, there's no point in saying that it depends because we both know that it always depends on the context, right?
For sure.
What are your goals, personal preferences, personal environment, just the person you are? All these kind of things play a role in that one. But a general rule I always have to clients is hit a minimum amount of protein for that meal or for that day, depending on how long
Hmm.
that event is, whether it spreads across the entire day or whether it is just an evening dinner, for example. But try to hit a minimum amount of protein. That's what I always recommend, like 180 plus or something, right? The more protein you get from as a macronutrient, the better it probably is, instead of going mostly with fats and carbs or
Right.
something. Also because it's saturating, all that kind of stuff, right? And overeating on protein is the least detrimental. And when you check that box, I would always have a cap on the total amount of calories. It's hard to track though. I just want them to make a mature and conscious estimation of what they ate throughout the evening, throughout the event. And they don't need to be on point, but still, I want them to be, just a little bit aware of the food choices they've been doing and not just go into YOLO mode. Like, okay, I'm not tracking, thus, I just don't give a fuck about what I'm eating right now,
Right.
right? Still, be mature about it because everyone wants to be treated like an adult. So act like one. And the difference between kids and adults is that you actually can make rational decisions and not just purely emotional decisions. And in that case, it holds true as well. You know that probably eating all the cake on that night isn't the best decision. Maybe it is better to actually have a plate of veggies before that with some lean meat and then have a small piece of cake, right? Instead of, just turning completely off or switching completely off and then saying, okay, because I can't track here accurately, I don't give a fuck about it. And then I can actually fix the issue afterwards again. Make mature decisions about the food choices on that evening or that event. And other than that, there are always kind of small tricks, such as when it's only half a day event or evening dinner, you can actually do something like intermittent fasting for the first half of the day, have only like, I don't know, some protein feedings so that you're saving up some calories. You could even go as far as banking some calories throughout the week so that you have more to play with on that specific day. So there are certain strategies you can use depending on the context and the length of the event, and also the caloric content of the event.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that those are for sure really, really good strategies that can definitely help you out with like the energy balance equation. But do you think that that could almost sometimes, depending on the individual, of course, give people more of a mindset of, well, I saved up all these calories, so screw it. I can do whatever I want. And just kind of, do you think it can potentially set people up for that, well, F it mentality?
Absolutely, and this is something you have to be cautious about, especially because, let's say you banked some calories prior to the event. Then you're coming in with a little bit more hunger and a little bit more cravings, maybe for sweets, depending on how much you actually cut. That's why I always give kind of the recommendation of only bank calories or take calories from maximum of 2 days throughout the week, and a maximum of 20% per day, right? That is not a lot, but it should be plenty for that evening or that day. That is still could count up to 500, maybe 2,000 calories for that single day. That should be enough to go out, enjoy the night, enjoy the dinner, enjoy the event with family and stuff. Because I mean, no one really likes to be like super stuffed on. Okay, let me just rephrase that, because that's not entirely true. I didn't really think about something like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner,
Right.
because people tend to really go crazy on these days.
Yeah.
And everyone just feels like totally stuffed, right?
Yep.
But don't go so much overboard that you are feeling like you can't even walk anymore, right? Once again, it comes down to making mindful decisions and having some kind of a mindful approach to eating. So when it comes to the term intuitive eating, I'm not the biggest fan, because it can be misinterpreted. There have been two researchers who came up with the term and what it actually implies, but people misinterpreted what it actually means. And when we take the word intuitive, like from a dictionary, it is based on emotional decisions and not rational decisions. And I think mindful eating is a way more appropriate term for that, because when you're mindful, you are kind of making decisions that are emotionally, but still based on a rational decision as well. You are still thinking about it. You're still making the decisions you would like to, and in that case, you can still enjoy yourself and stuff. So, regarding your question, whether people take advantage of the situation and go crazy, basically, definitely. And I think when you are that type of person and you know yourself that you can't control yourself, then banking calories might not be the best option. Do something like a half-day fast might not be the best option, because it could leave you really ravenous and hungry for that situation. In that case, it's just more of a matter of fact, like, okay, try to make some really mindful decisions on pick the vegetables before, I don't know, the sweets or something, right? So that you have at least something in your stomach, that you are at least a little bit full before the true feast is going on. And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, nothing more to add on that one.
Well, Pascal, I think we are kind of coming up on time here. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have anything that you want to plug for Revive Stronger or anything like that here?
I mean, you're probably putting everything in the description below and stuff, right?
Yep,
So,
for sure.
yeah, all platforms for Revive Stronger, over on YouTube, website. Then, what else is there? Instagram, yeah. And if someone wants to follow me personally on Instagram, it's Pascal_Flor. I mean, I'm rambling all the time. I'm not posting so frequently, simply because I'm not the biggest fan of Instagram. Even though that Steve always kicks me in the ass that I need to get my shit together when it comes to stepping up my Instagram game. But yeah, I'm always, I don't know. It's like procrastination on Instagram from our side. But yeah, follow me. I'm more than happy if people wants to know more about me. And sure, if there are any kind of questions, they can always find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and ask me some questions, or just tell me how good looking I am, or what a fucking asshole I am, something like that.
Well, that sounds great, Pascal. Thank you so much for coming on.
It was a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.
And that is episode 4 with Pascal Flor. You guys knew I was going to make that rhyme again, did you? Yeah, you do it. All right. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. In my next episode, it's a solo podcast of me diving into frequency and kind of giving you a lot of information that you might want to know about frequency and that might be potentially valuable to you. So hopefully you enjoyed this. And if you really want to help me out, leaving a review would really help me in the iTunes charts and things like that and spread this information to more people. So I really would appreciate it. But that's all I got for you. Thank you for tuning in.